Hi, this is Tony Agnesi, and welcome to this edition of The Storytellers. This is episode number 8 of our third season, and The Storytellers debuted this year on the Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministries. We premiere the show on Wednesdays at 6 p.m., and then it will premiere on my YouTube page at youtube.com/Tony Agnesi at 6:15. The radio version is produced for the third year by the Living Bread Radio Network, and it airs on their network of stations, and it also airs on several other stations here in the Midwest. I want to remind you to follow the program, if you will, on Facebook and Twitter, and you can follow it at The Storytellers. And don't forget, while you're there, follow me at Tony Agnesi on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. And while you're at YouTube, check out my new 5 Minutes with Tony series. We have 24 of those posted so far, and we post 2 new ones each week on Monday and Thursday. Just some reflections on everyday life. Each week on the program, we feature an inspirational guest, and we discuss not only their personal faith and career journeys, but the ministries they share as both authors, speakers, bloggers, radio and television hosts, and today is no exception to that. Antony Kolenc is a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Air Force Judge Advocate General Corps, spent 21 years doing that, and he's the author of the Harwood Mysteries, and it is a medieval historical fiction series, and it's geared for youth, and it's published by Loyola Press. Tony's full-time job is as a law professor and appellate advocacy. In addition, he writes a legal column on Practical Homeschooling magazine, and he writes and speaks all over the place. And Tony, wonderful having you with us. Thank you for joining us here on The Storytellers.
Thank you, Tony. It's good to be here.
I have a hard time of being, as I am, of connecting this legal guy with writing historical fiction. Tell me a little bit about the Harwood Mysteries and how they came about.
Well, the Harwood Mysteries, it's currently a trilogy. We'll see if it goes on beyond there. But it's published by Loyola Press. And as you mentioned, it takes place in 12th century England. It's really historical fiction for middle schoolers and high schoolers. And it's about a boy named Zan and his best friend Lucy. And they wind up at a location called Harwood Abbey, which is in Yorkshire, England. And they wind up having to go on different adventures, solve some spooky mysteries. And at the same time, they're sort of dealing with various coming-of-age type themes, such as, what am I supposed to do with my life? What does God want from me? And actually, especially Zan has some pretty bad things happen to him. So he's also struggling with things like, why do bad things happen to good people, and, forgiveness and themes like that. The first book, actually, I'll show you the cover, is out already, Shadow in the Dark. And the other 2 books are due for release in 2021. And so we're excited about that.
What's it like, releasing a book in July with COVID and all of those things going on?
That would not
trying to get it to middle school guys to read it.
That would not have been my first choice, but God has a greater plan, I'm sure. And Loyola Press has a great plan too, and they've been spectacular at rolling this out in the middle of a pandemic. But yeah, you just kind of throw up your hands. You can't choose some of these things, and you just trust that it'll work out the way it's supposed to work out.
Now, were you intrigued with England and historical times, medieval times, as a kid growing up? And did you spend any time there? So, as you reference this in your books?
I come from a family of Italian immigrants, mostly, came through Ellis Island back in the early 1900s. So I don't really know why I would be some sort of an Anglophile, because I don't really have any English blood in me. But for some reason, probably just because I grew up in the United States, learning about English history has always been fascinating to me. And this particular time where I placed the books in the late 12th century, there is all sorts of really cool historical events going on. We're about 15 years after the martyrdom of St. Thomas at Becket with King Henry II, who is still, you know, in the final years of his reign. We've got the Third Crusade that is about to start up in just a few years. In fact, you know, if I keep writing in this series, my main character might wind up in that crusade if I can get him there. And St. Francis and St. Dominic are just around the corner, about 10 to 15 years. You know, I mean, there's just all sorts of great things going on both in England and throughout all of Christendom, really.
Mm-hmm. And through your books, there's this, the underlying pinning of faith and Catholicism and dealing with gratitude and forgiveness and some of the questions that young people ask. I'm sure you're aware of the statistics, Tony, about, over half of the people under the age of 30 are now claiming to have no religious affiliation. And it's something that is of concern to me and in terms of, fatherhood and so forth. How important do you think getting this message to, especially to young guys, is?
It's incredibly important, and to young boys and girls, really. The series is meant to reach beyond, even though my main character is a boy, it's meant to reach beyond that. And I'm actually a father of 5. I actually have 3 grandkids, believe it or not. And this is near and dear to my heart also, what you were talking about. In my other job as a law professor, I actually write a lot about religious liberty issues in the First Amendment, and how our culture has sort of eroded the place of religion even in the legal field. Although with the new Supreme Court continuing to get stronger, we might see some good cases continued in that area. But the point is, you're right, this is a very important time, and that's really one of the reasons I wanted to have this series out there. I wanted it to be there for not just Catholic kids either, frankly, because this the series takes place in the 12th century. So we're 300 years before the Protestant Reformation. There really was no other Western form of Christianity at this time. And so I actually have had Protestant readers who kids love the series too, and their parents like it also. And frankly, it's not even meant to be a purely religious book. I mean, it takes place in an abbey, and there are, at that time, there is a lot of religious stuff going on. But really, it's meant to be just a book for young people and a series for young people. And I would hope that any young person could, relate to the themes that are in the book.
And important themes they are as well. So here you are. I mean, you're with the Judge Advocate General Corps, and I know you teach law, and I know you write a lot. How do you go from that kind of writing, which I'm sure is very technical and very, to being a fiction writer, and then zeroing in on the specifics of, of kids in that middle school, early high school age?
Sure. Well, you'd be surprised how many lawyers are closet novelists. I've been shocked at, the number of people I come across that when I mention that I'm a writer also, they have like novels that they've written also, some of which are, in work, some of them are published, some are not. I think there's something about lawyers and writing, because we're so tied to writing as part of our trade. And because so much of our writing is a little bit more formal, I just think it may be a creative release for a lot of lawyers. And for me, I always wanted to write. I mean, as a teenager, I have some very horrendously written stories, that were knockoffs of Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings, that I still have stuffed in the closet somewhere. So I've been writing my whole life. And but the reason this series came together, honestly, obviously I thank God and Loyola Press for really finding this and making it work. But the reason I really focused on this age group was because I did have children who were in their teenage years, and we were a homeschooling family. Like you mentioned, I write a legal column for Practical Homeschooling magazine. I still do now. So, it was important to me to want to have what I would almost want to call good literature for teenagers, but modern literature, something that is like the Harry Potter series, but that a family that might, have more, religious or family values would feel even more comfortable with than Harry Potter. Although, frankly, I think Harry Potter has a lot of very good things in it. But yeah, so that's how I focused on this particular series.
Shadow in the Dark is the title of the first book in the series, called The Harwood Mysteries. Antony Kolenc is my guest, and Tony is published by Loyola Press, and books should be available just about everywhere. It came out in July. How are things going so far with the series?
Well, I think so far they're going great. Loyola, as I said, has been fabulous. I couldn't have asked for a better publisher to put this series out. In fact, right before we went on the air today, their marketing people sent me some statistics from their, Facebook ads, and I mean, so they're very active. And frankly, the head of Loyola was recently interviewed, and she said the sales were robust. So that sounds good. I don't know.
Yeah, robust is a good sound.
Robust is a good word. So I liked hearing that, and they know that this is a series too. And I think the hope is going to be, especially as we come out of the pandemic and the other books start coming out, that, I can tell you what my hope is, that that the series is going to be used in schools. Frankly, Loyola has great curricula that they market to both private Catholic and public schools, and so there's like a natural channel there. And homeschoolers, Catholic schoolers especially, I think this would be a great series to complement their history or English curriculum. And so what I'm really hoping is that parents of kids in this age group will start reading the book and say, what, this would be great, we should really have this in our classroom, and telling their teachers about it. I mean, I think that would achieve what I really wrote the series for. I wanted it to get in the hands of young people who were going to be dealing with these kinds of issues, but wanted a really good, fun, kind of spooky story to deal with in the process.
And we know also that, maybe a year or two from now, somebody reads the second or third book, they enjoy it. They have a tendency to go back and, and read the first and second. So the sales kind of, for each book, kind of increase as the new one in a series comes out. That's been the case with with the nonfiction that I write. But as each book comes out, it kind of spawns some new interest in what was written before.
That's the hope.
Tony, on the show, I like to kind of, since the show's the Storytellers, I like to find out some personal stories as well. Obviously, you're a member of the Catholic Writers Guild and have a strong faith. And I really would like if you'd take a few minutes, if you could, and just kind of share with us your faith journey growing up and to today.
Sure. Well, I grew up in New Jersey. As a cradle Catholic, really. My mother was, I would say, my strongest faith influence. She was the one that brought the kids to church and this type of thing. I went to Catholic schools for elementary school and an all-boy Salesian Catholic high school in Paterson, New Jersey, which is no longer there, unfortunately, Don Bosco Tech. But so I kind of grew up around Catholicism, and I was involved in youth groups and this type of thing. And when I was in my late teens, two things happened. Number one is I started having children, and my wife and I, had two of our kids, I think, by the time we were 20, basically. And at that same time, I also fell away from the Catholic Church. I actually started going, my wife and I started going to a Bible church, like a born-again Christian kind of situation. And as much as I'd grown up in the church, and you would think I would have understood a lot of it, I really don't think I really was connecting with it or fully appreciated it. And so my journey sort of left the church for a few years. And I'm not sure, maybe I'd still be gone from the church, except I took a job probably when I was about 20, and was working with this guy who was a strong Catholic in his 20s also. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start having a conversation with this guy, and I'm gonna convert him so he could see the error of his ways. And so we sort of started having a dialogue, and he introduced me to the Apostolic Fathers and to history, to a book by Carl Keating that Catholic Answers puts out called Catholicism and Fundamentalism or something like that. Mm-hmm. And when I started, reading on my own and opening my mind and my heart a little bit, I realized that actually my road had no choice but to come back to the church. Because really, once you know church history, it's hard to stay away at that point, because history doesn't make a lot of sense otherwise. And so I did come back to the church. Around that same time, I joined the Air Force, and and it's been a rocky struggle. Faith is always an up and down thing, and life throws a lot of curveballs at us. And I think that might be another reason why, I like the series that I'm writing here, is because it allows my characters to kind of struggle a little bit with their faith also, when bad things happen. I forgot to mention, my father actually died when I was in 7th grade, very young. He was 57. And so I also sort of grew up, my teen years without a father. And so, all of us suffer loss in some way or other. And I think that, has impacted how I write, and even, how I've written this series, because I think, frankly, all of our, kids nowadays, they're dealing with some sort of loss in their lives, whether it's the loss of a parent to death, or loss of parents to divorce, or just loss of friends, or moving around. I mean,
we have
a portable concept.
40 million kids in the United States with no father figure or father in the household, and in the African American community, it's almost 80%. And these are situations that you learn on the street instead of as you should from that father or father figure in your life. So it's very, very important. Well, I know you're involved in homeschooling too, so your wife must have something to do with this to do that. Tell us how that all came about. And now with COVID and everything, we've got a lot of people who are being introduced to homeschooling.
Yes, that's right. That's, just like that, we're all homeschoolers overnight. But my youngest is actually now a sophomore in college. And so our homeschooling days are basically over, although I still write the column for the homeschooling magazine. But yeah, my wife was extremely influential. She is my strongest critic, as you might imagine, as any good wife would be. And so whenever I have some new thing I'm writing, and if I think it's amazing and just eye-wateringly good, I just have to let her read it, and then she disabuses me of that. And I say that sort of with tongue in cheek, but the reality is I can't tell you how much I've modified my stories, and even in this series, through her input. And frankly, the other person who's had the most influence on the series is my son, who is now in his 20s. But he was sort of around at the beginning when I was writing it also, and he gave me a lot of great feedback and great ideas. In fact, the third book, I entirely changed the ending after I previewed the ending to him, and his response was, "Dad, you can't end the book this way. You need to change this." And then I did that. And again, he has really keen senses, just an appreciation for art and storytelling himself. And so even now, I let him read my writing, and he still gives me great feedback.
Whenever I interview writers, a lot of times I'll get questions afterwards, and it's like, for the young aspiring writers out there, or old aspiring writers, they have this story in their mind, right? How do you, what are some of the things you have to do to get it from here onto paper, Tony?
Well, what I like to tell young people, because I've got a pile of unfinished manuscripts, both from my teenage, 20s, 30s, 40s, you name it, I've got unfinished manuscripts, and so do most authors, because we all want to write the great American novel, it seems. I actually like to encourage young people to write short stories, because when they write short stories, they can hone their writing skills, and they can actually see the end of the story and get it accomplished. And frankly, short stories are very interesting. In fact, I just wrote one for an anthology that Catholic Teen Books is putting out next year for St. Patrick's Day. Mm-hmm. And, I really appreciate the ability to, write something in a short stint. And, for young people, it's too easy to get discouraged, I think. And so if they take on the big novel, many of them won't get it done, and then they may kind of fall away from writing because they just get discouraged. So I would say start with some short stories, read some books on the craft. None of us, or most of us, are not natural writers. As much as I thought I was a great writer, my friends in the Catholic Writers Guild over the years have really taught me how to write fiction. And it turns out that I didn't know all that much after all when I started, and I'm still learning now. So don't be discouraged. You just got to keep going. Find other writers to to encourage you. I like the fact that I'm in the Catholic Writers Guild because these are other people who also appreciate that a lot of us are writing for varied purposes, including just trying to use talents God gave us. So find other people and read, and don't get discouraged.
Yeah. My StoryTellers series started out, I didn't know how I could ever write a book. And somebody once said to me, can you write 750 or 1,000 words? And I go, yeah, well, just write 50, do that 50 times and you've got a book. And 3 books later, and I'm not much of a writer at all. Just ask anybody who's edited anything of mine. There's generally more red ink than black, but we get it done and get through it. On the subject of homeschooling, I had one question. With everything going on now in education and with the political climate and so forth, do you see anything that may be important to note about homeschooling in terms of the law and legal parts of that? I know that's a part of your expertise.
Yeah, well, thankfully in the United States, homeschooling is legal in every state, and through various lobbying organizations such as the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, we've really blown open the doors on homeschooling and legality in this country in the last 50 years. And so the good news is pretty much anyone can homeschool anywhere with a high degree of freedom, and so that's great. There also are a lot of public schools going online. I know Florida, where my family and I live some of the time, is Florida Virtual School was one of the early schools out there, and it's a public online school. And so some homeschoolers use it. Their kids stay home and do it. And some people say, well, that's not really homeschooling because you've got teachers out there who are teaching your kids. But it's more like homeschooling than not like homeschooling. And there's a lot of that out there too. So there's just so many opportunities for parents, and it's not like the old days where you had to have even a parent staying home from work. Now there's so much flexibility in doing these things that you can really, as we are now finding out, right? You can fit this into your lifestyle no matter how it is.
Yeah, we've been forced to make that accommodation. Tony, tell our viewers and listeners where they can see more on you, websites and social media and so forth. Where can they not only find out more about the Shadow in the Dark, but also about you and some of the other work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. The good news is my name is very unique, right? Antony Kolenc, no H in Antony. There's not too many people out there with that name. And so you can Google me and find just about everything you need. I have a website, antonykolenc.com. I have Twitter and Instagram and some Facebook pages for the Harwood Mysteries, and also a separate author page. So all those things are out there. And so it's not hard to find. The books are, of course, available not only through Loyola, but on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and ChristianBook.com and all sorts of places. But I always like to put a plug in for your local Catholic bookstore, because we know how much they're hurting. And I would love to see my book on their shelves, and I would love to see anybody who wants to buy it go to your local Catholic bookstore and just ask them to get you a copy and to stock it. And it's kind of a win-win, because they are definitely struggling with COVID also, and already bookstores across the board, but Catholic bookstores especially have been struggling over the years. So why not give them our business too?
And our radio broadcast is sponsored in part by CatholicBook.net. And I know whenever we have an author on, they try to make sure they stock that book, and it's a great opportunity for our listeners to do exactly what you said, is to get the book, but also be supporting their local Catholic bookstore or CatholicBook.net in this instance.
Yeah, and Tony, I realized let me wrap back around to one of your earlier questions that I didn't fully answer. You asked about if I ever traveled to England.
Yeah.
And I actually did. Back in 2015, I was teaching a class in France for the summer, and I decided at the ripe age of 40-something to decide to finally do my college years, where I would go traipsing about the UK, staying in hostels. And that's exactly what I did for 2 weeks. I went and visited all the places that I was writing about, in Yorkshire and in Lincoln, and went to Ireland and Scotland, and just really, to the abbeys. Of course, they're all in ruins. I mean, because after Queen Elizabeth, the English abbeys, the places that I'm writing about don't exist anymore except in ruins, because they were destroyed after the Protestant Reformation began, and there was such conflict in England between Catholics and Protestants. But you can still go and see the ruins, and and I learned a lot just by being there in person. It was a lot of fun, and I like to sometimes post. Thankfully, I took a lot of pictures while I was on there, so I like to post those types of Throwback Thursday, photos from my research tour, as I call it.
Fantastic. Well, Tony, this has been a fun half hour. And for those people, I know we have a lot of teachers that listen to us. We have a lot of grandparents that listen to us. What a wonderful series that you can introduce your kids to, your grandkids to. It's the Harwood Mysteries medieval historical fiction series for young people. It's published by Loyola Press. Their very first book came out here just a while back in July, called Shadow in the Dark. And Tony Kolenc, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure having you with us. Nice to finally meet after these years as members of the Catholic Writers Guild.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure being on your show. I appreciate the time.
For more information about those books, you can visit TonyAgnesi.com. We'll have links to all of Antony's material as well. And don't forget to visit my YouTube page at youtube.com/Tony Agnesi. Well, that's our show for today. The program premieres at 6 p.m. on Wednesday evenings on YouTube at the Fiat Ministry Network and at Patchwork Heart Ministries. You can also get it at TonyAgnesi.com or on my YouTube page, youtube.com/Tony Agnesi. And be sure while you're there to subscribe and check out 5 Minutes with Tony as well. The radio program is produced by the Living Bread Radio Network and airs on Sunday at 4 p.m. Check your listings for the location near you. Programs also available on the StoryTellersRadio.com and later in the week at the Catholic podcasting site, breadboxmedia.com. This is Tony Agnesi. God bless you. We'll see you next time with another edition of the StoryTellers.